Hello and welcome back to another episode of Agritecture's travel-free digital conference series. I'm Henry Gordon-Smith, founder and CEO of Agritecture. And if you're wondering about my hat, it's because I'm currently in Muscat, Oman. I came here for a business trip to attend the Global Forum for Innovations in Agriculture, and my flight back was canceled due to COVID-19. So obviously this conference is all about giving a voice to thought leaders that missed opportunities to speak at conferences, and also for Agritecture to be able to showcase kind of what it does and promote that. So we're really grateful that you're following us today. And we want to ask you to subscribe to YouTube, to Agritecture on YouTube. Make sure you like this video if you like it, and comment with questions for us or our guest throughout the series. Thanks so much for following. I'm really excited to introduce our speaker today. It's Chris Rawley, founder and CEO of Harvest Returns. And he's going to be talking to us about strategies for raising money for farms and why agriculture is the future of investment and something wise to look at. How are you doing, Chris?
I'm doing well, Henry. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, where are you at today?
So we are based in Fort Worth, Texas, all hunkered down like 3 billion other people in the world. I've heard that that's how many people are all on quarantine or isolating. So, but things are going as well as can be expected, and we're continuing to operate business and do what we do.
I'm really glad that you're able to continue and adapt to these circumstances. For us too, it's been really interesting to kind of get the creative juices going at Agritecture as we adapt to this. But we're all really excited about your presentation today. So I'm going to pass it on to you. You can share your screen. And at the end, let's have a bit of a discussion.
Yeah, great. All right, everyone. Just a little bit about myself and my background. So I grew up here in North Texas in the suburbs, kind of a city boy, didn't really have much of a farming background. Not much of a foodie either. I ate whatever kind of frozen food my mother put in front of me. Like a lot of people growing up in the 80s in the suburbs, and that all changed when I after college I joined the Navy, and I got to see the world, as they say, and I traveled very extensively. And one thing that I noticed wherever I went was that people were much more in touch with agriculture and their food systems, especially in developing countries where they didn't have a choice to either grow their own food or buy it from a local market there from their neighbors. So I gradually, after I left active duty in the Navy, I worked in different industries, including commercial real estate and technology. And I've always had this interest in investing. So back in 2016, I decided to sort of combine, it's around 2015, 2016, combine this interest by looking to see if I could invest in a farm. And it turns out that's not an easy thing to do. It takes a lot of capital, it takes a lot of know-how. There weren't really any streamlined mechanisms to do that. So in 2016, we started up Harvest Returns to provide an online platform for people to access offerings in specialty agriculture. And we bring investors together with farmers and agribusiness entrepreneurs who need to raise capital. And we've been doing that since then, helped about a dozen or so farmers raise around $4 million. And our velocity keeps accelerating. We get to talk to farmers every day, so it's pretty exciting. So I wanted to share with your viewers some of the things that I've seen, some of the things that might be relevant given the current crisis that we're all facing, and some of the agriculture trends and how they may be able to think creatively about funding their farms during these times. So as most people know, there aren't a lot of people that are like I was in the 80s, who are just kind of take their food for granted. Here in the United States, the food system and food preferences are changing very rapidly. Diets, you can see a couple of them up in that word cloud, are adapting to just meet consumer preferences, whether it's eating healthier, whether it's eating more sustainably, whether it's people who care about the environment. People certainly care about where their food is produced, how it's produced, and who's producing it, much more so than my generation did, at least when we were growing up. And so that's driving a lot of the market. That food market is obviously driving a lot of the agriculture market. And so we see that those of you who are either involved in agriculture, indoor agriculture, or various types of agriculture, or would like to become involved, there's a lot more options now. It's not just about row crops and fields and fields of vegetables. It's becoming much more specialized, and it's also becoming much more capital intensive. So vertical farms, indoor farming, it takes much more than just a piece of land. There's capital equipment and labor and all those sorts of things. And what we see is that although the food system is evolving rapidly, agriculture is evolving rapidly, the methods by which food is produced, that the agriculture finance system has lagged behind. And not only is it lagged behind, it's slowly finding itself in crisis, like a lot of other parts of the economy, and not just because of our current COVID-19 problems. The ag finance system, at least in the United States, is pretty much optimized for large-scale row crop farmers. If you're doing anything outside of that, it's a challenge. It can be a challenge to find capital. And you can see just sort of this series of chronological articles dating from headlines dating from 2018 that it started off with the drop in commodity prices. So that preceded this crisis and has been going on for several years, that lenders are starting to tighten their standards, and then bankruptcies started increasing, as one might expect. Farming is one of the only industries that I can think of where you actually have to put your family legacy at risk sometimes to get a loan by mortgaging your family land, even if it's been in your land for your family for 3 generations. It's simply just not fair. It's not fair on the producers. And the other thing that most people know is that producers extract a very small percent of the value chain by actually producing their food that goes into a piece of food. So for every $1 of food that's sold, I read somewhere, I think it's like 2 or 3 cents actually goes to the farmer. And that can change, and indoor agriculture is one of the ways that can change, and locally grown food is one of the ways that can change. So these bankruptcies are unfortunately accelerating in the farming industry. And then you couple that with the full-on credit crunch that basically the world's going to be facing here in the immediate future, due to the access of credit and potential for hyperinflation. It just becomes a mess. So the farmers we talk to are looking for alternatives to this sort of existing system. They're looking for agile, flexible funding sources, and that's one of the things that we like to help our farming agribusiness partners get access to. So I wanted to just kind of summarize some of the things. If you're a farmer or an agribusiness entrepreneur and you want to raise capital, like I said, we work with hundreds of investors, and we work with we talk to dozens of farmers every month. So we've kind of gotten this idea of the best ways to put those two together. And so the first thing is you need to have a plan. A lot of people have an idea, but an idea is not necessarily a plan. Or they have a vision. A vision is great to have. I want to start this project, but planning is very important. And it's not just the plan; it's the planning process. That's something that we always say in the military. So putting a plan together requires you to think of all different aspects, not just the growing piece, but especially the finance, the markets, and the economics piece of what your project, your farm's going to look like. So doing a plan shouldn't be done by yourself. Bring in the experts you need, whether it's a CPA or an attorney or just a consultant, somebody that has experience in the industry, has experience in the growing method you're doing, and has experience in the economics of what you're doing. So that's very important. When you're producing a plan, seek expert help, because nobody is an expert in any given thing. So when I say math matters, that's the finances. And if you're an agronomy expert and not a finance expert, that's okay. Again, find somebody who can do that. But investors are looking for not just outright returns and risk-adjusted returns. They're looking to at a project before they decide to invest, and seeing if the math makes sense. And we talked to a variety of different types of producers, whether it's sheep producers, other types of livestock, indoor ag, tree crops, you name it. We've kind of seen a little bit of everything, and we always there's a basis of math. We like to say sheep math, because it's based on the breeding cycle of a sheep, or almond math. It's based on that growing growing cycle of the trees. And all that's very much different than if you're doing 4 or 5 crop rotations a year inside a greenhouse with strawberries or leafy greens or something like that. It's the math is all different, and you have to convert that agronomy math into financial math. Producing to determine what kind of returns you're going to produce for your investors, if you are bringing in investors, or if you're seeking debt or capital, that you can pay that debt service to a banker. Finally, understand and disclose the risk. You have to understand risks to disclose in order to present the risk to investors so that they can have confidence in what you're doing, in yourself as a business person, yourself as or your team as a farming team, and as a good steward of their investments. So you've got risks that are very common to all agriculture deals. That's sort of the market risk. You've got disease, pest, drought, all those sorts of things that most of us are familiar with, that are in this industry. And then you have these black swan risks, like a pandemic, and those are very hard to prepare for. If you understand the term black swan, it's like one of those once in a generation sorts of things that comes around that yeah, maybe some people did predict, but most people didn't. And there's really not a way to adequately prepare for it. And sometimes you just can't. And that's where it helps to have a little bit of a buffer in your operation, whether it's a financial buffer or you're producing. You've just got a little bit of resilience and robustness in the way you're producing and what you're doing. And lastly, it's important to think like an investor. So a lot of times we talk to farmers and they have a hard time putting themselves in the mindset of an investor. And that's kind of, we help to bridge that gap. But investors are most important, first and foremost concerned about preserving their principal in their deal. So they don't want to lose money. That's the biggest deal. And not every investor is alike. Some are looking for a higher risk, higher return. Others are looking for something very safe. And your deal may be one side of the spectrum or the other, or it might be right in the middle. Generally, we're looking for deals that are kind of more that middle range sort of thing, where there's a safe risk-adjusted return, but it's a return that can potentially beat the stock market, especially in times like this. And that's one thing that we hear a lot of now, but it's always been true, is that agriculture is not generally correlated with the stock market. So the market can have wild fluctuations, but if you're growing strawberries, they're going to keep growing. If you're raising cattle, they're going to keep, or tilapia or whatever it is, they're going to keep growing regardless of what the market does and regardless of what kind of panic there is, all things being considered. So think like an investor, and if you have a hard time doing that, talk to somebody who knows what that means. And that is basically the end of my presentation, Henry. I'd be happy to talk to your questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. Super valuable to get these best practices and these methods in mind about how to prepare. So I've got a bunch of questions based on this that you're really inspired for me. So I think the first question for me really is, there's this question of the right scale. When we think about all these new entrants to the space, they want to go local. A lot of them want to go CEA. A lot of them maybe want to engage in other practices. I mean, there's all kinds of people moving into agriculture now. But a lot of what we see is local and urban agriculture. And there's difficulty with scale at that level. Could you talk a bit about the scale of deals you're working with, not necessarily from money, but the sizes of the farms, and how you maybe talk to farmers, new farmers, about choosing the right scale? Because obviously if you go larger scale, you can kind of play in that wholesale game. You maybe have different abilities to raise money. You have different risks and different opportunities. You have to be able to raise quite a bit of capital if you're building a big greenhouse or a big vertical farm. But if you're going smaller scale, you have different advantages around maybe faster payback, more control over your customers in some ways, and different risks because you're going to have a difficult time raising money in the long term. Could you maybe talk about how entrepreneurs should think about scale in the context of fundraising for agriculture?
Yeah, I think, as you alluded to, there is a massive difference in the range of indoor agriculture from somebody that's doing microgreens in their basement to multiple acre, multi-site greenhouses to, larger companies we've seen where they're kind of building a franchise or a model. It's a wide, vast world. And I think the thing that's important for someone that has this idea or wants to start whether it's a CA project or any sort of farm, is that they have to take a honest and realistic view of themselves and what they bring to the table. So they're a backyard gardener and they just want to sell some stuff at the farmer's market. Well, cool. That's where you are. Maybe you need to raise capital for that. Maybe you don't. Maybe you need a little loan. Maybe you can put it on your credit card. If you've been doing something at a smaller scale and you're ready to scale up and you've got a team and you've got a track record, that's what investors are looking for, is that track record. Then you're probably ready to raise some outside capital, and then it only scales up from there. Are you looking for private money? For private investors, that's generally who we work with. Or are you looking for institutional money? That's things, venture capital funds, private equity funds, could be family offices. People with extremely high net worths are moving more and more into what we call family offices, where they have a dedicated team of investment professionals who are putting their capital to work for the family, so the family can focus on whatever else it does. So there's a wide range of investors that cover a wide range of projects, and to kind of understand what that spectrum looks like of where you are, just what your level looks like, whether it's, if you're a one-person show, and we've helped, one-man shows raise capital. We've also helped big teams raise capital where they had some, very complex stacks of capital with bank financing together with private investors, together with our pool of investors from Harvest Returns. And it's a big scale, or a big spectrum, and it's important to know where you fall on that spectrum. And if you don't, it's important to talk to somebody who might be able to kind of work you through that.
Yeah, and I like how you describe some of the key questions you would want to ask if you're exploring agriculture, right? What kind of business do you want to run? Do you want to run more of a talking to restaurants business, going to farmers markets, consumer-focused business, or do you want to really build kind of a consumer brand or something that's going to be more, about distribution? There's a lot of different areas to kind of disrupt, and I think even in production, there's a lot of different scales to consider. So I like that first question that we talk to a lot of our clients is, what excites you about this? What's going to keep you coming to work when it gets tough? Because as you mentioned, agriculture can be really challenging. So, my entry into urban agriculture was largely around exploring how controlled environment agriculture could help cities grow more food, especially in climates that it's difficult to grow outdoors. CEA over time, I've understood in quite a bit of detail that CEA is very capital intensive, as you mentioned. I think what's really interesting now is that there's a lot more revived interest in regenerative agriculture and agroforestry. One of the things you talked about is that it's really important to kind of make these estimates about the future for your business. Think about, what are the returns you're going to have? What are the yields you're going to have? How does that relate to your CapEx and your ROI? But one of the things that I'm excited and interested in is how these more regenerative approaches to agriculture, which take longer to kind of deliver results. You kind of need the soil to restore, or you maybe have crops that take longer to grow. How does Harvest Returns kind of explore that? And do you see any kind of unexplored opportunities in sectors beyond kind of the sexiness of controlled environment agriculture that you think entrepreneurs should consider from an ROI perspective, more regenerative agroforestry kind of approaches?
Yeah. Like I said, we work with a variety of different types of agriculture. One of the businesses we really like is pasture raised livestock, and humanely raised livestock, because there is that consumer demand for it that's growing in the US. Much of that is imported, so there's a big domestic need. So identifying what your market is, like you said, is vitally important, regardless of how you intend to produce, and who your customer is, whether it's local consumers or it's a large scale distributor that's going to support major urban areas, and you want to make sure your production is centered so that the supply chains can support that. Especially, in these times, we're seeing supply chains that we've taken for granted for a long time can be disrupted or overwhelmed. We see that in the meat industry, which is interesting because it presents a pretty good opportunity for the producers we work with. And I think it's also going to be interesting. One of their observations we made talking to some of our CEA folks is that As everybody knows, here in the U.S., most of the vegetables in this country are produced in California. So what happens when the migrant labor, because of this lockdown, isn't available to either plant or harvest those products? That seems to me as an opportunity for people who are doing locally grown produce wherever, anywhere east of the West Coast.
So I guess that's great. So do you see CEA as more appealing to investors than other forms of agriculture? I mean, you mentioned, um, some kind of animal husbandry as well that you're exploring. Do you see,
Uh-huh.
and if it is more interesting to the investors you work with, why? Maybe explain to our audience why CEA, controlled environment agriculture, might be more appealing to some investors, or maybe it's more appealing to more and more investors.
I think more investors are starting to understand it. They've seen, other parts of the world how it works, whether it's in the Middle East where there's just not the climate to grow outdoors, or in Europe where they've really embraced CEA and as a way to grow food sustainably and locally. And I've talked to some, investors that when we put these opportunities in front of them, they're very interested, because it is, like you said, there is a sexiness factor. There also are some unknowns that we're all learning about.
Yeah.
The more you learn, the more you peel back the layers of the onion, that it's not all, beauty and easiness and put up a greenhouse and press a button and stuff grows. We know
Yeah.
that it's not easy. So investors, there's a learning curve. I think we're all learning, both the producers and the people that are on the investment side, but we have seen an appetite for it. And I think that appetite is going to continue to grow. And I think, potentially this crisis might kind of wake some more people up to the possibilities of it.
You made a really interesting point about how traditional farmers, or the historical farmers, they have a difficult time getting a lot of the value chain, a small percentage of the value chain, because they're producers, and then the product essentially moves off the farm, and there's all the other ways that the product is upsold. What was the number you gave? Was it 8 cents
I
of a
think
dollar?
3 cents of every dollar is a number I've seen
So
go to the actual producer.
that's microscopic, essentially, when you think about a dollar and that small amount. So, do you think that CEA allows producers to have a bigger portion of that?
Yeah, and there's a couple of ways. I don't have I'm not sure the breakdown of the numbers actually exist yet. That's something we need to research. But one, the supply chains are shorter.
So
Just
local is probably a big driver for that. Why do you
yeah,
think that is? Is it because they can get a better price for it, as mentioned in your trends analysis at the beginning? Is it because consumers
yeah.
are paying more for local, so that percentage goes up, but the fraction of it actually doesn't go up? Or is it because the distributors cut out, I imagine?
In some cases, yeah, you can cut out the distributor if you're selling direct to a restaurant or direct to a hospital or school, institution. That certainly takes out some of the puts more value on the back of the farmer. And fortunately, there's not only is it just the CEA that allows you to do that, it's technology. There's plenty of apps out there that are matching producers with restaurant owners, or producers with institutions
Yeah.
that need purchases.
So it's not just CEA, it's kind of the ag tech movement overall.
Mm.
Everything from precision agriculture that's helping farmers reduce waste, which allows them to increase that percentage. Disruption, you said, on supply chain and distribution strategies, new marketing strategies probably, and some of those other trends. Very, very exciting time to get into agriculture, certainly with all that opportunity. Agritecture primarily works with entrepreneurs. Most of our clients are entrepreneurs. They've been successful with some other business. And when you were talking about the need for a business plan, you need a convincing business plan before you can kind of really make progress. Harvest Returns helps with that. We certainly do some help with that as well. What are the unique aspects of an agriculture business plan? Because a lot of our clients have experience with entrepreneurship and business, but not agriculture. So maybe kind of tell our audience, what are some of the things that are exist in agriculture business plan that don't exist in a traditional business plan?
Yeah, I'd say they're not completely different, but obviously understanding the math, the agronomy, and the production schedules, production cycles is important. Whether you're dealing with a tree crop that you may not see a crop / return for 6 or 8 years versus greenhouses where you've got multiple crop cycles per year. So translating that, like I said, into a financial pro forma a 5-year plan. What is your 5-year financial plan? It's going to grow. And what is your exit strategy? Exit strategies investors are always looking for. One of the things that kind of differentiates us is we design these deals somewhat like commercial real estate deals because that's our background. So we're looking for an exit strategy in several ways. They're either going to develop their project, get the cash flow stabilized, and sell it at some point, or refinance it to make our investors whole again with some sort of targeted return. Or they're going to continue to expand and then either buy out the investors. It just depends. There's a number of ways that it can be done, but that's one thing that
Yeah.
people need to understand is you got to have an exit for investors.
Yeah, I think very cool. And when people typically think about farms, they don't really think about exit strategies. I mean, they usually are kind of passed on to the children. So that must be really interesting to explore how a farmer or a new farmer can think about exit strategies, which in an area which traditionally that doesn't happen. And so that's kind of a very interesting shift as well in agriculture. One of the things you were talking about that was also really interesting to me was around this agronomy math piece. It's really difficult, again, for somebody not in agriculture to find the right data. When I was first getting started, I had to kind of dig through academic paper to kind of estimate yields. And you find yourself in these holes where you're looking at some kind of research report about a certain variety and how much water it's using, and they happen to have yield numbers, but there's not like an online yield database for agriculture yet. And so, for these business entrepreneurs getting into agriculture, how do they find that data? And maybe what are some things you'd like to see in the future as part of this ag tech movement that might help entrepreneurs have better agronomy math?
Yeah, the easy answer is, the one USDA or any the farm bureaus will tell you is the agriculture extension services, which are great. They've been around the country for a long time, and they're traditionally the sort of go-to resource for farmers, kind of low cost resource that's local there. However, I'm quite convinced that if I was going to start up a CEA project and I went to my local agriculture extension service, they couldn't help me. So
Yeah.
fortunately, other companies that are starting to come up that do provide a consultancy that are starting to gather some of those data. But the nice thing about farming, I think maybe maybe compared to other industries, is people aren't so proprietary about their things. I mean, obviously there's some technology, especially when you start to get into the biotech side and maybe the ag tech side, that it's proprietary and should be protected. But if it's growing methods, man, just get on YouTube. There's somebody growing something in a unique way and sharing their knowledge about it.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'll just add a couple more tips, having worked with about 100 different new farms and their business plans. One of the things that I think that needs to be in an agriculture business plan that's unique is really a calculation of waste in an accurate way as it relates to that agronomy math. And some of that may come from crisis points, like what we are experiencing now, which are hard to predict, as you mentioned, but it could be seasonal changes that might drive that. It could be labor issues, which is something you mentioned, or it could just be a lack of experience. A lot of the business plans that I get from entrepreneurs, they have 5% waste in their first year, and that's just not realistic. As you're trying to get the farm itself working together, as you're getting your customers, it's natural to have losses in farming systems. So we try to help them create a specific target. I'm sure you look at that as well. I think another one is labor. Even though that's in any business plan, you have to really think about labor because it fluctuates so much in agricultural systems. And so you have to try and estimate and understand those activities. That's something that we find a lot of. And I guess I'll just do a plug because Agritecture is about to launch Agritecture Designer, which is an online business planning software for greenhouses and vertical farms. What we've done is we've uploaded all of the most common local agriculture crops grown in vertical farms and greenhouses, their data. And so users will be able to explore that and get estimates in a matter of hours or even less than an hour, as opposed to the typical journey of talking to an extension agent, looking at academic papers, et cetera. So this is, again, trying to help them estimate and move forward. Chris, thank you so much. This was really valuable information, and it's great to know that an organization like yours exists. We're not going to have new farms without funding strategies to fund them and keep them going. And that's a critical part of this ecosystem. So I really enjoyed learning about it today. Where can people learn more about your work and Harvest Returns and connect with you?
Yeah, the easiest way is to go to our website, harvestreturns.com. If you are a producer, we have we're happy to answer your email or take a call, but we also have a you have an idea and you have at least a basic plan together, you can submit that idea, and we'd be happy to at least have a conversation on how we can work together to potentially help you raise capital. Otherwise, we're on social media, Twitter, Insta, LinkedIn. We try to produce a lot of content, both for investors and for producers and things like this as well that helps educate, because that's a big part of this is education.
Well, big thanks to Chris Rawley, founder and CEO of Harvest Returns, for his presentation today. If you enjoyed this presentation as part of Agritecture's Travel Free Conference, we invite you to subscribe to Agritecture on YouTube. You can also like this video and share it with your friends. We're going to be releasing new videos every weekday at 12 noon EST, so stay tuned as the conference goes on. You can learn about the whole conference at agritecture.com/digital-conference. Thanks so much. And again, connect with Chris and check out Harvest Returns.
Thanks, Henry.